For a long time now, I've always thought most star rail tier lists you can find online aren't quite specific enough, so this time I thought I'll do it myself. And it's pretty damn hard. I'm going to be ranking pretty much every single unit in Star Rail based on my 2+ years of theory crafting, making award-winning guides, and just playing the game at a pretty high level. Firstly, I'm going to be starting with the sustains because I think it's the easiest to do. Tier 0 is pretty obvious. We have Hyacinth and Dunhing PT. Hyacinth is just used in so many very strong meta-relevant teams right now. Obviously the full Remembrance team, the Exodia team, Casteris, Evernight, Hyacinth, Cyrene. She can be used with melee as well, Jingliu, Blade, technically Acheron, the Herta, because she has AoE attacks and she can apply a debuff if you have her S1. The only weakness Hyacinth has is that she's SP negative, but other than that, she deals a stupid amount of damage because she deals damage based on her healing. If you have S1, she can apply vulnerability. Her healing is pretty much automatic or right after you take damage, so it's very hard for Hyacinth or her team to be one-shot, and she scales off HP, so she's naturally tanky. It's like kind of crazy how strong Hyacinth is compared to some of the other healers that we have. Dunhing PT is also really good. It's kind of insane that he's a free 5-star unit. He's just one of the best free-to-play units in Star Rail right now. He is able to give you a huge attack boost, so for most attack scaling teams, he's really very strong. If you are able to attack very frequently, like an XR, Phase Shell, and so on, then you can advance the dragon's attacks or shielding, which will mean even more damage for your team. Yeah, it's kind of insane that the dragon also provides an AoE shield and also dispels your debuffs. And then when you use his ultimate, it can even deal damage based on the bondmate's stats. So it's going to deal decent damage from 100 to 300k, and he can actually provide some damage and contribute on that front, because most other sustains are unable to contribute damage at all, which is probably why Hyacinth and Dunhing PT are the only tier 0s, because not only can they keep your team alive very well, they can also actually deal a ton of damage. Next in tier 0.5, we have Gallagher, Lingsha, Aventurine, and Huohuo. Gallagher, if you didn't know, is pretty much the best free-to-play sustain unit in the game and also one of the best free-to-play units, period. In the 2.x meta, I found myself using Gallagher over and over again because he can just be used in so many teams. He's obviously built for break teams, but he can be used for Acheron, can be used for DUT, can be used for Robin teams, which would include like Facial and so on. It's just kind of insane how flexible he is on top of being skill point positive. In addition to that, he also gets really good healing because he can apply the ultimate debuff to multiple enemies. The more enemies you hit, the more you are going to heal, which is why Gallagher was the go-to healer for Casteris in 3.2. And when you combine his skill point positivity, his flexibility, and his healing output, it's no wonder why he's such a meta-relevant unit to this day. At the end of 3.8, he still can be used very well in a lot of other teams. If you don't have the go-to healer or the best in-slot healer like Aventurine, Lingsha, or Huohuo, you can just use Gallagher and you will probably be fine. Lingsha, Aventurine, and Huohuo do perform better than Gallagher in the best in-slot teams. Like, Lingsha is quite literally a 5-star Gallagher. So you may be wondering why Lingsha, Aventurine, and Huohuo are in the same tier as Gallagher, and that's because of their flexibility. There's some things in their kit that prevents them from being able to be used in as many teams as Gallagher. For example, Lingsha needs to use her skill points once in a while. Huohuo is completely skill point neutral, which makes it really hard to run her in teams that uses a ton of skill points like Archer or NXR also technically. Aventurine just doesn't provide much utility to other kinds of teams, and it's not very good for HP consuming teams as well, so his flexibility is also kinda restricted. They were really dominant in the 2.x meta teams, but obviously power creep is a thing, so here they are now in 0.5. They are still able to keep your team alive very well. Their healing and shielding are still pretty good, but other than that, they always fall short in some department, like their flexibility or their utility, which is the difference between like Hyacinth versus Lingsha or Hyacinth versus Huohuo, and why Dunhing PT is just much better than Aventurine because he gives you buffs, attack buffs, and then he can contribute to the damage as well. Next for tier 1, we have Locha, Lynx, and Fuxian. Locha, all he does is just heal, that's pretty much it. He even has some downtime in between because you have to get 2 stacks in order to activate his passive healing again. Lynx is only really good for HP scaling units because she can increase the HP and I believe also increase the taunt for destruction units or something like that. So she's really good for Blade, and Blade did get a rework, right? But why would you ever use Lynx when Hyacinth is a thing? And that's why she's tier 1. But if you don't have Hyacinth, she can still be kind of used. Fushan aged really badly, and I was even considering putting her in tier 2, but I still think she's a step up from any of these units below. Fushan is able to give you crit rate buffs, I believe, and redirects damage taken by your team to herself. The problem with that is that if the enemies have a very strong AoE attack, which a lot of enemies have at this point in the game, Fushan would just get one shot. Yeah, she's just not very good anymore. Probably why she was added to the 50-50 pool. She kinda needs a buff if she wants to be any more relevant. Next in tier 2 we have Japad and Bailu. They are the starting 1.0 5-star sustains. They don't really do a lot other than healing or shielding, which is why they are tier 2, but they still do that job better than the units here in tier 3 plus. Natasha, March 7th, and Preservation MC, they just don't really do a lot. They have quite a lot of weaknesses in the kit, and I would not recommend using them pretty much ever. So next we have the support category. We are going to be rating them based on their utility, obviously, because they're supports, and their flexibility in teams, which is why I believe Chibi is the best support in the game right now. Her buffs are Rest Pen and Vulnerability, which is used for pretty much every type of damage in the game. She's even able to deal extra damage due to her ultimate additional damage and her follow-ups, making Chibi a sub-DPS almost, and considering the fact that damage is what matters the most in Star Rail, I think it's kind of a no-brainer that Chibi is a very good support unit. Next we have Robin and Sunday. They have quite a lot of overlap, like with Iglea or Jingyuan and Exa and so on like that. The Robin Sunday combo is quite potent, but on her own, Robin is actually also very good for dual carry teams like Facial or DOT recently, because you can get the 100% attack boost from Kafka's Trace. From there, we have Remembrance Trailblazer, who is kind of similar to Sunday. 100% action advance, true damage, and crit damage. There is some parts of the meta where Sunday isn't as strong for, like for Caceres and Evernight. They are used for a lot of teams in the game right now and is a very strong free-to-play unit. Probably the best free-to-play unit in the game right now, I would say actually. It's just that Elation MC might be a thing soon, so they might drop in priority when the meta will shift to Elation. But for now, very strong tier 0. Next we have Cyrene, Runmei, Silverwolf, Cypher, Dahlia, and Harmony Trailblazer. Dahlia and Harmony Trailblazer are here for the same reason. They are very strong for break teams. Harmony MC is able to abuse dance, and Dahlia allows you to super break even without breaking. So Dahlia kind of just carries the entire break archetype on her back, and Harmony MC is what allows you to clear stages super quickly. Silverwolf and Cypher on the other hand are quite similar. They are both defense reducing supports. The issue is that they are nihility and then they cannot apply the debuff permanently, unlike 3B, who is a Harmony unit, by the way. Doesn't really make sense, right? Does it? But because of that, they are not the best in slot in pretty much any other team other than Acheron, but they are very flexible and can be used for other teams if you don't have the corresponding best in slot. Runmei is also very similar. She is very flexible due to her damage boost and rest band, which is why she was used for Final Sustainers teams. Unfortunately, she is being power creeped by Dahlia for break teams. But despite that, she is still very flexible, and hence why I think she's tier 0.5. Cyrene is the complete opposite of that. She is very niche, mostly used for Chryso-Airs, and even within the Chryso-Air teams, she can be a side grade at most, like for Finon and Hycidance. However, she is still a part of the Exodia team, right? The full Remembrance team. She's still really strong for Mayday, really strong for NXR, really strong for Iglea, and hence why I think she's tier 0.5. I think tier 0 is a bit too much considering how niche and how inflexible she is. For tier 1, we have Bronya, Sparkle, Saridra, Fuke, and Tingyun. Tingyun is very similar to Runmei. She's very flexible, but her buffs are not very strong. She's also able to abuse dance very well and also give herself a huge speed boost, and hence why it's still kinda useful in quite a lot of teams, but she's just not close to best in slot anymore. Fuke is very strong in break teams obviously, but kinda useless outside of them. In fact, probably just useless. Some parts of the kit are just not utilized at all, which is why I didn't put her in 0.5. Like her ultimate just does nothing. It's a colorless break, but it doesn't even apply her defense reduction or anything like that, which is why I don't rate her very highly. Saridra kind of the same. She is mostly used for attack scaling, skill reliant crit hyper carries, and if you just changed Saridra's attack buff to vulnerability, rest pen, or damage boost, she would have been a lot better because she would be able to be used with Mayday, Jingliu, and so on, but that is not the case, and that is why she is tier 1. Bronya is Pretty much a free-to-play Sunday. The biggest issue with Bronya is that she's not skill point positive like Sunday can be, or skill point neutral at the very least. She's very, very skill point negative. But even then, the buffs on top of the 100% action advance is very strong, and hence why I still think she's tier 1. Sparkle is kind of weird. She's mostly used in Archer teams right now, and before that she was just kinda useless. She might even have been tier 1.5, but she is getting a buff next patch. So because of that, and also because of how strong Archer is right now, I think she's tier 1. And if the buff is really strong, or if she gets more units that she can be paired with, or best in slot with, then she might even go up to 0.5. But for now, I'll just put her at the back of tier 1. Next for tier 2, we have Xiaoqiu and Pella. Xiaoqiu and Pella are just victims of nihility. They are literally just worse than Harmony units for no particular reason, because the developers thought that, you know, if the bosses change phases, they should also dispel debuffs, and because of that, they are just worse. And also, a portion of Xiaoqiu's vulnerability is ultimate damage. So if you do not deal mostly ultimate damage, most of Xiaoqiu's buff will only be 35% vulnerability, and that is pretty much all he provides to you. Pella is just a budget Silver Wolf and Cypher. It's just defense reduction, and that's all she does. And then again, it can be dispelled by the bosses, or if a new wave comes in, you have to refresh it again. Finally, in tier 3+, we have Hanya, Yukong, Esther. I'm not sure which one of the two is better here. I think Yukong, because Yukong is quite decent in Finon. Hanya, I don't really see a point in using her ever. I've mostly only seen her used in Archer teams because you can regenerate like 1 skill point or something like that, and the attack buff is pretty good. Other than that, I've not seen her used at all. Esther has just fallen off a lot. Teamwide speed buff can be strong, but it's tied to her ultimate, and the attack buff isn't very strong because it's quite hard to maintain. So yeah, she's just not very good. And then finally, we have Welt. Welt is actually supposed to be a sub DPS, I think. Or even might have been meant to be a main DPS when the game released, but like, he doesn't really deal damage at all. He deals so little damage that I would consider him a support. And all he does is reduce the enemy's speed and delay the action, which is borderline like what a sustain should be doing. And because that doesn't contribute to damage at all, I think he's just the worst support in the entire game, even if he's a 5-star. So now for the DPS category, I'm actually going to be splitting them into 5 target, 3 target, 1 to 2. I always do this for all my calculations. If you didn't know, you should not be comparing 5 target to like 3 or even 1 to 2. That makes no sense. So to make it more accurate and clearer, I'm going to be splitting them up as usual. Anyways, the best DPS in the game for 5 target scenarios, in my opinion, is Evernight. Evernight has very, very high raw damage output. She's a bit dependent on remembrance units, but if you are able to fulfill those conditions, the damage she puts out is insane. And in a duo carry team with Caceres, the performance goes up even higher, especially now with Cyrene. Next we have Diherta. Diherta is still a very strong 5 target DPS. She has fallen off a little bit. I think her energy being very high makes it a little bit awkward. There's less control, and you kind of just have to use her ultimate instantly. You can't quite hold your damage for a second wave or a later time like Evernight can. There's less ways to play her properly. You're kinda stuck on her damage ceiling, which is why she's tier 0, but I think in the future, I wouldn't be surprised if she drops a few tiers. Next, I'm going to put Kafka and Hysilence in 0.5. They have very strong AoE because of their ultimate. One of the best go-to teams for Pure Fiction. Just quite a lot of AoE damage in general. And if you're using 3B as your support, you can increase even further. Even in non-Pure Fiction 5 target scenarios, it's still pretty good if you're using like Robin or something, because you can get the 100% attack boost from Kafka. All around, DOT is stronger in 3 to 5 targets in my opinion. Next, Acheron, Rappa, Jade, and Nexa. Maybe even Saber. So Rappa just did get the buff from the Dahlia. She benefited the least because she isn't fire, doesn't regenerate energy, and she cannot implant weakness. Despite that, the damage output is still relatively high. And then we have Jade. Jade is a bit weird because she's quite dependent on her Depth Collector, dealing many instances of AoE damage in a row. So I wouldn't quite put her tier 0. I don't think she is that good right now. I think it's more so because we don't really have a good Depth Collector that can always be paired with Jade no matter the circumstance or scenario. So not the best, but still very strong in 5 target scenarios. Then we have, I would say, NXR first. NXR gains more damage based on the number of enemies there are, like 20% for each enemy for his skill, I believe. But NXR is quite counterintuitive. He's an erudition unit that I would say actually does better in lower target scenarios due to how efficient his damage is, because it's all bounce damage. He is a very strong dual DPS if you pair him with the Herta, but even by himself as a hyper carry, some people still seem to think that he's not really good. But Anissa is one of the best DPS units in the game, period, right now. Maybe the 4.x patches may change it, but at the end of 3.8, I would still say NXR is really good in 5 target scenarios, especially when you use him with the Herta. Next, we have Acheron and Saber. I actually think Saber is better right now. Acheron might even drop to tier 1. Yeah, Saber has AoE scaling on her enhanced basic attack and the ultimate. It's like 280% or something. And then the rest of the ultimate is 10 times bounce. Still very strong in 5 target scenarios, but not so great in like pure fiction stages. More so Memory of Chaos, Apocalyptic Shadow, those kind of 5 target scenarios. But still strong AoE scaling, strong AoE multiplier, so I think back of 0.5. Next, Acheron, Aglia, Phynon, Firefly, Mayday. Maybe Blade. Acheron has fallen off quite a lot because she just hasn't been getting good Nihility units that can greatly increase her damage again. Kind of like Hyacinth for Castoris or Cyrene for Castoris. No such unit has came along for her. Like Cypher is very general. She doesn't boost Acheron as much as a best in slot unit would. Like a 3.x version of Xiao Qiu would probably push Acheron up to 0.5 or even 0. But right now her damage output's kinda low. Silver Wolf did get rework, but having to use 2 Nihility units is really restrictive, especially when most Nihility units are just worse than Harmony units for no reason at all. It's just the developer's choice. And I think as a result of that, Acheron can't really put out that much damage. Next we have Aglia and Phynon. Aglia, she attacks so frequently that she can be used in 5 target, even 1 to 2 targets despite being a 3 target DPS because she can attack so many times, which is why she's still a tier 1 in my opinion, but obviously there are better choices than her. But if you brute force with her, especially with the new Cyrene buffs, she can still work very well. Phynon prefers to deal with 1 to 2. He's probably one of the best 1 to 2 DPS units in the game, and also due to how inefficient his bounce damage is from the Star Death Verdict, he's not the best at dealing with 5 target scenarios where sometimes the weaker mobs just don't really need much damage to deal with them. But he has his counter, which deals more damage based on the number of enemies, or rather how many enemies attack him and how many actions they take. So he's still decent at dealing with 5 targets, but he would prefer to deal with 3 target and below ideally. Firefly, kind of for the same reason as Aglia, huge buff from the Dahlia. Still decent at dealing with 5 targets, but you have better options in Rappa if you want to run a break team. Mayday is also very strong now with the Cyrene buff because you can now activate God Slayer anytime you want, and it's also 200% crit damage or something crazy like that. So still really good, even though all his damage is 3 target just like Firefly. Blade's damage is quite a step down from all of these units in front of him other than maybe Acheron. Acheron's only here because she's full D5 targets on her ultimate, but Blade's follow-up attack is completely AoE, and I think that lends a little bit to helping him deal with 5 target scenarios, which is why I'm going to put him at the back of tier 1. Next, tier 1.5, we have Jingliu, Yunli, Himiko, Herta, and I would say Black Swan for now. Black Swan is completely carried by DOT. You would ideally opt to run a team without Black Swan right now, but just like Sparkle, Black Swan is getting a buff next patch, so she might shoot up to 1, 0, or even 0.5, I'm not sure. But right now, in most 5 target scenarios, she's kind of meh. She doesn't really deal much damage. It's hard to apply her defense reduction. Arcana stacks run out pretty fast and stuff like that, and all these issues hold her back quite a bit. Jingliu is, she got reworked just like Blade, but she's mainly 3 targets. She has no AoE attack, which is why I think she's tier 1.5 behind Blade. Yunli has a bounce which allows her to deal with 5 targets, but because it's a bounce, it's not great at dealing with 5 targets, but still decent enough. Yunli's damage output is just kind of low as well, being a 2.4 or 5 unit, so Miko and Herta are really carried by the Herta. Actually, Himiko by herself now is quite decent as well. If you use the Dahlia in Pure Fiction, she can be ran as a main DPS, but I still felt it was kinda hard even in a full fire weakness stage. So, not the best still. I think Himiko's kit needs a rework for her to ever go above tier 1. Herta is kind of there just for the Herta. When you pair the Herta with Herta in Pure Fiction, with Jade or something like that, they go to town, but she does no damage by herself and is really just a battery for the Herta. Next, we have Jingyuan, Danheng IL, and Argenti. Jingyuan is a really weird unit, kind of like an XR. He doesn't want to deal with full 5 target scenarios 100% of the time. He wants to clear them out, clear out the weaker enemies with his skill and ultimate, and then the Lightning Lord deals more efficient bounce damage to the elites or bosses. So it's not really like an erudition unit. I think it would be more accurate to classify him as a destruction unit, but yeah, I don't know. He still has some AoE scaling, but his multipliers are really low even if you have Sunday. It's just not enough. He doesn't give himself enough buffs or has enough attack scaling and stuff like that. So Danheng IL is also a product of his time, just like Jing Yuan. And out of the 3 destruction trio, Jingliu, Blade, and Danheng is the most single target focused, which is no surprise why he would perform the worst in 5 target scenarios. Argenti, he's really bad as well. He's mostly used, I believe, as a Herta battery in Memory of Chaos scenarios. In Pure Fiction, like, why would you ever use him? You can just use Himiko or Small Herta or Jade instead. And even in Memory of Chaos scenarios, NXR now replaces his spot as a Herta battery, so he's just kinda homeless, and he doesn't really deal much damage by himself either. Finally, for tier 3+, we have Qingque, Sele, Clara, Servo, and then the 2 DOT units, missing Luca. Luca is quite single target focused, so I'm not gonna put him at all. Sele is actually better when there are more enemies, because that usually means the enemies are also weaker, so it's easier for her to proc Resurgence. Like in a 1 to 2 target scenario, Sele is going to be completely useless because the enemies are way too tanky and she cannot proc Resurgence. Qingque is a erudition unit. She does decent damage for a 4-star unit. We don't really have other better 4-star erudition units other than like Herta. Clara, I honestly don't use Clara much, but I don't think she's very 5 target focused. She seems to be more 3 target. Her skill is AoE, but her counter when enhanced is Blast, so 3 targets. I still don't think she's very good. The damage output's kinda low. And then we have Servo, who is a budget version of Argenti, a battery for the Herta. And then the 2 DOT units that are kinda trash. Now for the most stacked category, it's the 3 target DPS section. It's because in 3 targets, some erudition units or 5 target DPSs can also be considered in such scenarios, and even hunt units like Mose, Topaz, and all, you can kinda put them in 3 target scenarios as well, and it wouldn't be too bad. So firstly, the best 2 units in the game, Casteris and Evernight. Evernight doesn't lose that much damage going from 5 target to 3 target, and also when paired with Casteris, who has a lot of bounce damage, she kind of piggybacks off that damage, and together they are a very strong team. Probably, like I said a million times, the best team in the entire game, the full Remembrance Exodia team right now. Next would be Phynon, in my opinion. His damage is still really high, even though Cyrene was a side grade for most of his teams at E0, and the less targets there are, the better Phynon performs. Next we have Firefly. Firefly got a huge buff from the Dahlia. She now can compete with some of the best teams in the game. If I wanted to be very accurate, it would probably be more like this is untouchable, and then Phynon onwards, but it would be kinda ridiculous to have 0.25, right? So anyway, Firefly, she's roughly like 60-ish K DPEV now. Sustainers, of course. With a sustainer, I believe it's like 50-ish K, and Phynon was around 40 to 50K as well. They're pretty similar, but Phynon I would say is easier to play. Firefly you kind of need to break, and you need Firefly specifically to break because she has the highest break effect, right? And I think that awkwardness when playing break teams can reduce your damage unintentionally, and I don't really like that, so I think I'll put her behind Phynon. Next, I think some people might be surprised. I'm actually gonna put Midday. Midday, he was kinda useless on launch, honestly. I mean, like, that specific Memory of Chaos or whatever, they were pretty good for him, and then he was just, like, missing for a long time. until 3.7 when Siren released. And because of Siren's buff for mid-A, you can use his Godslayer every time you have 12 stacks, and it's 200% crit damage, and for free, you don't need any extra charges. That adds so much damage to mid-A's damage profile that he actually rolls up to about 50 to 60,000 damage per action value. One of the highest actually, slightly behind Firefly, which is why I consider him to be the last of the tier 0s for a 3 target. From there, we have Aglea, Alexa, Hycidence, Kafka, Saber. So Aglea also got a pretty decent buff from Siren, but it wasn't the best. There were still some areas where Aglea would suffer. For example, she could take way too many turns if you use her ultimate, and then that would reduce the buff uptime from Sunday or something like that, which is why her DPAV was roughly 40-ish thousand. And Nexa is also really strong in 3 target scenarios. His damage output is roughly 40 to 50,000 as well. I would say Nexa is better in 1 to 2, and Aglea is better than 3T. Both of them are really strong still. Nexa is extremely strong as a hyper carry, and with Siren's buff, once again, it's massive when you combine that with Ceridra, because it's 8 bounces times 4, and then he gets like an attack boost and crit damage boost or something like that on top of that. So at the start of the battle, it's really slow, but once you get Siren's buff and you start to ramp up, he does a lot of damage, and he's still really strong in 3 target scenarios, even if he loses 40% damage on the skill. Next, Hycidence and the Kafka. They are still really strong, even with Siren. With Siren, it felt really bad when I was playing her, which is why I didn't really do calculations for them with Siren, because I couldn't even get like her ultimate on the first 150 action value, because you have to run Kafka with Hycidence. And if you don't run Kafka, you just cannot proc your DOT often, right? So it felt really awkward, and I wouldn't say it was a huge upgrade as compared to like Medea or NXR, but still strong enough to hold their own, even if you are not using Siren. Roughly 30-ish thousand DPAV. Still pretty good, I would say, especially for 3 target scenarios. Finally, we have Saber. Saber is kind of like Evernight in the sense that there is a big gap between the damage floor and the damage ceiling, depending on the player's skill. She is quite hard to optimize and use properly. It's a bit hard to gauge her properly because I've done 2 different scenarios and assumptions for her. If you get a ton of energy back, Saber can go up to like 40,000 DPV, pretty similar to the rest of the DPS in the tier 0.5 range, right? But if you don't get a lot of energy from enemies attacking you, she can drop to like 20 to 30,000. That would be like tier 1. So I'm just gonna assume that the Saber player is pretty good, and then she would be tier 0.5. Next we have Blade, Jingliu. I would say Jingliu first, Acheron, Yunli, Jingyuan. Like I said just now, Jingyuan mostly wants to deal with elites, with the Lightning Lord. Because it's no longer an AoE stage, his skill and his ultimate deals less damage. His damage output is just kinda low. Actually, I think I'll put him on 1.5. I just cut it off like that. Firstly, Jingliu and Blade, they both got reworks. They both reached like 30-ish thousand DPAV with Icing, 3B, Sunday. Exact same team actually. Jingliu slightly came out on top because he was a pure 3 target scenario, and Blade actually loses damage from his follow-up attack because it can no longer hit 5 targets, which is why I'm going to put Jingliu ahead in 3 targets. And for Acheron, I actually think I might put her behind Yunli. Yunli has bounce, so she's better against 3 targets. If the enemies attack very fast, her damage can increase a lot, but yeah, which is why it's kind of hard to gauge her because she's a counter unit, so it's very dependent on the scenario or stage. But even then, multipliers and stuff like that is kind of low. It's quite hard for her to, on average, outperform, I would say, Blade and Jingliu for most scenarios, I think. Acheron is just not very good at 3 targets anymore, but she still does decent damage. I would say still more than Jingyuan. And followed by that, Boot Heal is pretty good in 3 targets actually, but he would prefer 1 to 2. It gets a bit awkward at times if you have 3 elites for Boot Heal. With the new Dahlia speed tuning, he can get 3 turns, right? But it's not like he's going to one-shot all 3 elites with each turn. So I would still put him behind Jingyuan. I might put him in front actually. Lexon, like I said, it's not very good. Might get a buff soon. Might be 1 or 0.5 soon. For now, 1.5. Facial and Archer are the 2 hunt units that are really good at brute forcing stuff. At 3 targets, it starts to get a bit awkward and starts to get a little bit hard. But due to the high frequency of their attacks, they can still deal with 3 targets pretty decently. And in such a scenario, you can also like put in 3B so that she helps to cover up for some AoE damage, and both of them can use 3B. So I still think they are back of 1.5, not quite tier 2 like Dan Heng IL and Dihota, Rappa, March 7, Hunt, Mose, Jade, and Topaz. Dan Heng IL, yeah, he's just not aging very well. Even in 3 target scenarios where he's supposed to do very well, just doesn't do a lot of damage. And in such cases, Dihota can use an XR, right? So I might even put her up at 1.5, where she's kind of carried by an XR. I think top of 2 makes more sense. You would probably want to run like hyper carry and XR instead of dual carry at that point if it's a pure 3 target scenario. Rappa, not very good at 3 targets either. March 7, Mose, and Topaz, probably Topaz in front. They're great with facial. That's kind of why they're here. And then Jade suffers a lot just like Dihota once you go lower in targets because she stacks slower. If you have E1, you can go up like this, but this is an E0 consideration. Then for the rest of them, I don't think there's much to be said about them. They are just not really good for pretty obvious reasons, I would say. So finally, for the last section, the 1 to 2 target DPS, I believe Phynon is the best 1 to 2 target right now. His DPAV is one of the highest at 45,000. I think he just deals a lot of damage and is very easy to play. Very high damage floor and not much higher damage ceiling, but still the damage floor is high enough that it doesn't quite matter. And Exa is also really strong in 1 to 2. Again, like I said, ironic considering his erudition, but his bounce attacks and the frequency of the bounce attacks is what allows him to be so strong in lower target scenarios. In terms of damage per action value, he is lower than Phynon at about 40-ish thousand, 41,000, but that isn't considering his damage efficiency, right? It's really hard to gauge him as well, mathematically, but from performance-wise and still the damage mathematically is still really high, which is why I still think he is the second best 1 to 2 target DPS. Next you have Boot Heal, again a fat buff from Dalia. His damage per action value is quite a bit lower than Alexa and Phynon at about 30-ish thousand, but still, he's really strong in such cases. If you give him Pocket Trick Shot and you have double toughness from Fugue, does so much damage, and now you can deal super break damage even before breaking, but when you do break, oh man, that's a lot of damage. And finally, for the last of the tier 0s, we have Archer. Archer is Giga OP. He just does a lot of damage. I think his DPAV was roughly 20-ish thousand as well, but being able to attack so many times and the ramp up from this skill, and together with Sparkle's buff, he might even shoot up a little bit, 1 position or whatever. I think he will continue to be tier 0 the next patch. From the next patch onwards, like 4.2 and so on, I'm not very sure, but right now, Archer is a very strong 1 to 2 target DPS. From here, Facial, Heglea, Saber, Casteris, Hycidance, and Kafka, I would say is tier 0.5. The only reason why Casteris is here, which might be a bit weird for most people, is because of her bounce and because of Siren's new buff that allows Casteris to deal extra bounce damage if she summons the dragon when there are only 1 or 2 enemies remaining. This allows the Exodia Remembrance team to deal with pretty much any kind of scenario. You can deal with 5 targets, which is their best in slot. You can deal with 3 target, which is still, I would say, their best in slot. And you can now also better deal with 1 to 2. But you can definitely feel the power difference, especially if you're using Evernight, because Evernight is quite bad in 1 to 2 targets. But I still think it's strong enough to keep Casteris in tier 0.5. Anyways, Facial, she has fallen off a little bit. She's still pretty strong at about 20-ish thousand DPV, but I would rather use Archer over Facial most of the time. I guess if you really want to, you could put Facial at tier 0 as well for 1 to 2, but I think there's a small difference between like Boot Heal and X Archer and Facial. She got some small buffs from Dunheng PT, but yeah, that was about it. Next we have Iglea. Like I said, Iglea is very versatile, just like Anixa, because of her frequency of attacks, and damage isn't split as nicely as Jingliu. It's more single target focus even for a 3 target attack, blast attack, which is why I would still put her at 0.5. Finally, Saber, she deals increased damage on her enhanced basic if there are 1 to 2, and her ultimate is also bounce, which allows her to deal with many different kinds of scenarios, and hence again why she's tier 0.5. Hycidance and Kafka, Actually, I think I'll drop them to tier 1. Yeah, damage profile is just kind of weird because Kafka's follow up is single target, right? But the single target multiplier is not very high, which is why I would still prefer to use Ice Silence and Kafka in AoE scenarios rather than 1 to 2. I think you would need like E1 or something to be able to compete on the same level. E1 High Silence to be able to compete on the same level as the other DPSs here. Next, we have Firefly. I think I'll put March, Mosaic, and Topaz in tier 1 as well. Firefly, she's still pretty good in 1 to 2. Because of Dahlia's implant, or rather Dahlia's passive, you give Firefly extra 20 toughness on the single target for free. It's kind of ridiculous and gives her a lot of damage. So now she's better at dealing with one target scenarios. I think I've showed this also in my Anomaly Arbitration, the 0 cycle. She's a lot better at dealing with one target, which is why I think Firefly is now tier 1 at least for 1 to 2. Of course, this hunt units, the facial companions, they're all really good in 1 to 2 obviously. Next in 1.5, I would put March, Evernight rather, Dr. Risho, Mayday, Blade, Jingliu, Jingyuan, Jingliu, Danheng IL. Where is Jingliu? It seems I've forgotten about Jingliu. Jingliu should be somewhere here as well. Danheng IL, this is his best scenario as compared to Blade and Jingliu because he's more single target focused, right? Like I said, in his multipliers. But still, the damage output is just kinda low. I think still lower than them. Also not much higher. Mayday is really strong now, even in 1 to 2. His multiplier is more spread out, kind of like Jingliu. And I think that makes him a bit weaker in this scenario. Dr. Ratio, probably the worst 5-star hunt. 5-star limited hunt. I mean, he was given away for free, I don't know. He's not very good. He came out in 1.6 and then he got power creeped by a face shot in 2.5. You require debuffs to be able to shoot his follow-up attack and stuff like that. I just don't really like how the kit works at this point in time. I think there's a lot of things that could have been adjusted, but he is a 1.6 unit, so Evernight is still pretty decent even at 1 to 2 targets because she just does so much damage, which is why I'm gonna put her at the top of 1.5, followed by Yunli Black Swan. Actually, I think I'll pull down Danheng IL, Yunli over that, and Black Swan over. Black Swan again, carried by Kafka High Students. You would not want to use her. Triple duty is worse than double duty right now. You would rather use Cyrene, 3B, or Robin. And then Yunli has bounce. Actually, I might put Yunli here then. Her ultimate has bounce, so pretty decent against 1 to 2. If elites attack you very frequently, you get more damage, more energy, more ultimates. And then finally, tier 3+, we have, in no particular order, Sele, Yensing, Grey Knifen, Luca, and Sampo. Just not very good. And I think that's it.